Welcome to our exclusive webinar today, The Future of the German Economy. I'm Molly Ilbrock, and it's my special pleasure to introduce our speakers today. We're going to be discussing what Germany's done right, what Germany's done wrong, and what maybe the future holds. We're going to be discussing with Professor Jörg Rocholl. He's the president of ESMT Berlin. He is going to be in conversation with Nick Barniville, Associate Dean of Degree Programs and Director of our EdTech Lab here at ESMT Berlin. Just to give you a little background, Jörg has been the president of ESMT since July of 2011. He is a finance expert and holds his PhD in finance and economics from Columbia Business School. He does a lot of research in the area of finance, as you can imagine, and he is the vice chair of the Economic Advisory Board of the German Federal Ministry of Finance. Nick is an experienced business school leader, program director, and portfolio designer with a strong focus on social impact. Not our topic today, but one that we can maybe hold a webinar about in the future. He is currently, he says, his biggest challenge right now is learning just how agile he is. He is leading our EdTech team during the coronavirus crisis and the digitalization that has come with that. So I'm going to pass over to Nick, but I do want to make sure you know, please put your questions, because we will have a Q&A session after a while. Put your questions into the Q&A button at the bottom, and I will take those for you. So Nick, over to you.
Alrighty, yeah, hello everybody. Thank you, Molly. Molly, who also goes by Martha Ilbrock, is our Director of Communications and is in charge of running the show today. We're going to start off with a little poll in a minute. You know, I think the interesting thing for us to know right at the beginning is who's our audience. So this webinar was originally designed to approach alumni, current students, potential students, and faculty staff. So yeah, we'd be really interested. We've got 103 people online, so you can see there. Okay, who's who? Who are we talking to? Oh, come on, alumni, where are you? All right. Maybe alumni didn't get the message, but this is good. Okay, that was a quick poll. So we've got a group of current students here, many of whom are sitting at home, having done some studies online. Some in other programs have had their courses a little bit postponed. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, today, what we really want to talk about is Germany, the coronavirus, its responses, and what the future holds for Germany and for ESMT. So if we could stop sharing the results, and I'm going to just close that down. So Jörg, the big question for me is Germany had a lot of COVID-19 cases, but relatively few deaths. I mean, and I hear testing a lot of people. That explains a high number of cases, but it doesn't explain to me a low number of deaths. So I take even Berlin, which is the same size as my home country, Ireland, in terms of population, roughly, it's 80%. And Berlin has less than 200 deaths still, where Ireland has now 9 times that amount. So what really is behind the low death rate, do you think, in Germany?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. We certainly see, and first of all, welcome also from my side, and thank you, Nick, and thank you, Molly. Thank you for attending, and obviously also for engaging in questions and answers here. You see that Germany has been hit hard by the crisis. So the economic recession is predicted by the European Union to be around 6 to 7%. It's going to go up again in prediction almost by the same amount in 2021. But that also means that in 2022, we only can expect again the level of welfare that we've seen in 2019. So it's really the biggest recession we see in post-World War II period here in Germany. At the same time, and I will come back to that, and it relates to Nick's question, it is less of a recession than we see in many other countries. And thus, it is maybe, relatively speaking, a crisis that creates many of the positive comments we see at this point of time. And some of which, maybe on the next page, I'd like to share with you to simply see what are the, in particular, international reactions to the situation in Germany. So the one is from the New York Times, as Nick pointed out, why is the country's death rate so low? But then you also see, for example, as you can see on the left-hand side, that also there have been lots of measures of solidarity when it comes to very practical questions of healthcare, but also when it comes to more general questions. We will come back to how Europe as a whole deals with this situation in terms of solidarity. Now, coming really to the exact question Nick asked on the next page. Looking at what do we find? On the left-hand side, you see the total number of confirmed cases. And as you can see, Germany has a high number of cases. So being above, significantly above 150,000, getting closer to 200,000. So even above France, but being below United Kingdom and Italy. On the right-hand side, you see what Nick just said, that the fatality rate is much lower than it is in the other countries. So you see that the countries I mentioned before, Italy, France, are far ahead of Germany in this ratio, which is, as you can see, the ratio between the confirmed deaths and the confirmed cases. Now, on the next page, there's a slightly different view of this, and that is already part of the answer. That you see on the left-hand side, the number of tests that have been performed, and you see that Germany has conducted a strong number of tests, a very large volume of tests. And then on the right-hand side, you see a slightly different or a slight variation of what you saw on the page before, which is basically the deaths per million people. And again, Germany does very well on that dimension as well. So let's look into this in more detail on the next page. So, and this is, in that sense, you could say, still a situation with a lot of uncertainty. Even the virologists, the epidemiologists, they have to correct their insights almost on a daily basis, which simply has to do with the fact that they deal with a new topic and a new question. They get new insights day by day. But let's try to distill what we do know. And certainly one aspect is the one that we've already talked about, which is this large scale of testing. So a much higher testing volume has been available for a very long period of time, was already available at the beginning of the crisis. And this mainly is driven by a decentralized lab system, which allows for these high testing numbers. At the same time, this is a point I will come back to, the number of intensive care beds is much higher, even per capita, in Germany than it is in many other countries. This is in fact a point that was criticized for a long period of time. Many people said the German health system is inefficient. It costs far too much money. Now you could say it's really what used to be, at least what was perceived to be a disadvantage, is now seen as a huge advantage. The level of preparedness in that sense was higher. Now, you could also argue that having a scientist as head of government gives maybe a different perspective than having, say, a different background. And you could see this particularly, and you saw this reflected in many of the international media, that the Chancellor talked very much in detail about this so-called reproduction rate. So the reproduction rate, asking the question, how many people get infected by one infected person? And she actually had a press conference in which she gave a lot of scenarios, how these infection rates, these reproduction rates would affect the overall capacity of the healthcare system. Another point is, and this is something I will come back to, is a very high level of trust in government and society moreover. So is it really that the recommendations given by the governments are wholeheartedly supported, or are they basically seen as rather special interest and not really something one should follow? We've also seen, even though you could also argue this could be seen as a disadvantage, that the political system in Germany is highly decentralized. So we have 16 federal states. These federal states have taken different measures. And as you maybe can also read, some of these measures have not just always pleased everybody, including the Chancellor. But at the same time, maybe it allows also for a little bit of experimenting, trying different things, trying to see how it works in various regions, and then learning from each other and seeing how this can be implemented. Now, the other part is that the so-called social stabilizers are a very important part of the German welfare system. So that whenever a crisis hits, people will not right away go into unemployment. They still have their health insurance. So therefore also their support, the support being provided by these social systems is a very important part. Now, another potential reason that has been mentioned quite a lot is that many of the people who initially got infected in Germany were very young. They were skiing in many parts of the world, in particular in Europe. But those are also the ones who, while getting infected, did not have such a high risk of dying due to this disease. Therefore, this might have been actually a beneficial part in terms of the distribution of the population that got affected. And then finally, and this goes back to my first point regarding the uncertainty, it might also simply be that we had, for example, 2 weeks more time to prepare than Italy had. So these 2 weeks allowed for looking at the causes, the consequences that other countries have seen, and thus the country could prepare in a slightly better way. And this goes basically back to this final point on this slide. It could also be pure luck. We can't rule this out for sure, despite all the other reasons that I mentioned. But maybe going back to one point I just mentioned here on the next page, you see here the intensive or acute care hospital beds per 1,000 people. And this is what I said has been criticized quite a lot over recent years, but now it helped us a lot. So you can see here that Germany ranks just behind Japan and South Korea, again, 2 countries that also saw rather, not very drastic consequences of the corona crisis. So therefore, maybe to sum this up, lots of reasons have been brought forward. Lots of research is being conducted on these questions. Much of this is still in flow, but at least it gives some perspective on what might have helped to mitigate the crisis, at least to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, the one that gets me on the less people dying is probably the age distribution of the people affected. I think that's really been a key one. There's another slide, if I have a chance to show it later. It shows the level of intergenerational mixing between people in Germany versus people in Italy. And if you see people in Italy at the age of 10 to 15, they have an average of 1.5 contacts with people over 70 every day. And in Germany, that's at 0.2 or something. So I think, it's on the slide. Don't quote me on the figures, but I know that sort of intergenerational context is very, very relevant here as well. I'm interested to know your views. So living in Germany, we never sort of felt this sort of panic. What do you think were the key moments for Germany in terms of decision-making in the early stages of the pandemic? What do you think the politicians got right?
Yeah, so maybe let me start by first what they got wrong, but at the same time, maybe take a certain level of confidence out of that. So when you look at the statements politicians have made over recent weeks, maybe starting in late January, then over February to March, they probably would completely contradict today what they said in January or maybe in February. So in that sense, you could say they also had lots of insight that were not correct, but maybe that just represented the uncertainty at that point of time. But I think what was important is to also take into account that new academic insights came in, and thus the perspective and maybe also the practical implications shifted very quickly. So we saw, for example, that certain decisions that were ruled out a week before were then finally implemented based on new evidence that came in. And in that sense, you could say, being not stubborn to just defend one's own decision or view 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, but rather to adopt to new evidence that comes in. So therefore, I think this constant process of learning, also listening to really people who know, who have researched this field, I think is a very important part. And while the scientists, the virologists have always focused and emphasized that obviously they wouldn't like to make the decisions, they are just advising, they provided a lot of insight that could be used by the politicians in their very frequent exchange with scientists.
On that note, we're just going to, I'm curious to hear what the audience thinks. If we could launch the poll on how our viewers evaluate the performance of Germany in the crisis vis-a-vis its neighbors. This will give you about half a minute to
Yeah, I won't be so quick this time. I'll give people a little more time.
Because we can sit here talking, Jörg, and say we think that actually it's been a little bit better here probably. But it's interesting to see, okay, right. Yeah, so I think that's pretty clear. We've been in a lucky place. As for me, as an Irishman sitting in Germany, I've had conversations with friends in the States, friends in many other countries, and they just go, yeah, you're kind of lucky to be sitting in Berlin at the moment. One of the things that's been interesting for me is talking to people about lockdown. Everybody has a different impression of what the word lockdown means. In Berlin, we were always allowed to go out. We were always allowed to exercise, go to the parks. Do you think there's something in particular about society here that made that possible? Or how come we didn't have to have that sort of strict lockdown from a societal perspective?
Yeah, this is it's a very good question, because on the one hand, you also see here in Germany, people obviously not liking this type of situation. So obviously they would like to see their families, their friends. It's not something that goes easily to really forbid the traveling. And I can tell you from my own experience, having then went over Autobahn that always have traffic jams and not seeing any car on them. I mean, there has been a really very pronounced change in activity, in traffic and so on. And it's also quite interesting when you look at, say, the Google data, for example, that the real lockdown, or you could say the real decrease in activity already started 2 weeks before the actual lockdown. So people have already become more cautious, more careful. They've taken into account what they saw on the media. There was a lot of discussion there, lots of scientists being on the media so that people could look at that. And maybe, and this is maybe the next slide I'd like to go over, is also a level of trust that people see in the government and see in society more broadly. So this means when you look here on page 6, you see that first of all, just looking at trust versus GDP, there's a very strong correlation. And then when you look at the right-hand side, you see, again, you could say a poll that looks into trust that people have, their government and other parts. And you see here that Germany ranks at a very high level there. So this means there's also this trust translates into certain actions to be perceived more meaningful. So you will not question each and everything if it comes from a government or, say, a society which you trust. And this trust has been, in that sense, you could say, reconfirmed by the fact that many of these decisions have been at least advised by very strong academic, scientific evidence. And I think that is something that is very important for, let's say, for society, for the economy, to have this high level of trust and high level of mutual appreciation of what is happening. And you can also see this here in Germany in the fact that also the ruling parties that had a very difficult time last year, they now enjoy a very comfortable appreciation by the population trusting the government to do the right things.
Yeah, I guess that's also an argument that's being used a lot in Sweden. So they're saying, okay, we've got such a trust in our own ability to follow government advice that they've had a less strict lockdown as well. Although they're coming in for a lot of flack for that from different sides because the death rate's a little bit higher than their neighbours. It's all a learning process for all of us, I guess. And on the subject of this trust and this sort of willingness to follow and obey. I think one of the things that's also been interesting and people are asking me from outside Germany, what's going on with these demonstrations? So we see They were a little bit bigger a couple of weeks ago, but you have sporadic protests against the corona measures from they're so-called hygiene demonstrations, and the media is describing them as a mix of crazy anarchists, right-wing agitators, conspiracy theorists, with a few genuine heads in there. And there's also often you see, we've seen numerous examples of politicians from mainstream parties such as the FDP participating. So do you think the protesters have legitimate aims here, or what do they want?
Yeah, I think you put it very precisely. So we have basically two groups here, maybe getting together, and maybe one group trying to use the other group. So one group certainly is the group representing those who feel that the massive intervention by the government into personal rights of freedom, has gone too far. And you see this also reflected by politicians who asked for a quicker acceleration, also an acceleration of alleviating all the constraints. At the same time, you now see some, as you said, conspiracy theorists and other parts, maybe also some right-wing advocates who come up with all kinds of, in my view, crazy ideas. The risk, if there's only one, then it's that the latter, the second group, tries to interfere with the first group and somehow tries to mingle. But let's also keep in mind, and this is my view on that obviously all the rights, the pieces of freedom, the different constitutional rights we have, we should watch very carefully that they are not bended and that they keep intact, even at a point of time when people have a high level of understanding of why the government needs to work this way.
Yeah, again, super interesting. I mean, one of the first major steps forward out of lockdown in Germany will be the right to unlimited numbers of people to demonstrate. And I think this is, there's a real sort of tension there between trying to maintain a fully fledged democracy and trying to maintain public health. And I think Germany's it's doing a little bit, in my view, the old Chinese way of Deng Xiaoping. So he had this saying called "crossing the river by feeling the stones." So it's sort of you're sort of moving along, slowly testing things, and I think that refers a little bit to your previous point on the federal system allowing various tests to happen. How about Merkel? So her crisis performance. When we started thinking about this discussion, she had almost withdrawn, and she's kind of in leading, then she pulls back. She's back in leading, she's pulling back. So how would you evaluate her performance, and what do you think is her main motivation?
Yeah, I think you could say the volatility in there is indeed a very apparent one. So let's start first with the criticism she faced in, say, early February. People basically said she leaves it all to the Ministry of Health, and she basically didn't appear at all in public media. People actually even asked for what is her view on what is going to happen. Then actually she took a very strong leadership role in there. So she really appeared, you could say, on a daily basis on television. She started explaining her views. In my view, she even became, you could say, much more emotional than she had ever been seen in previous years. And then came basically the next twist, which is that then also the federal level, so this means the federal states and their so-called Ministerpräsidenten, they also got their view on it. And now it's probably a matter of discussion whether it's good or bad. So you could argue that maybe a more centralized approach sometimes can be better. But maybe you can also argue, as I did before, that it allows for a little bit more experimenting. So you can try certain things there and you can learn from others. But it also led very easily to more, maybe even frustration on the chancellor's level by not being able to keep her line, but rather to giving back certain levels of responsibility to the federal states level. And at the same time, and I think that is again a constraint that had to be put in, to also say that all these measures can be alleviated up to a point where, say, certain infection rates are guaranteed. Once these infection rates go up again, then certainly the government would have to take more control again. And maybe Nick, what you just described about this, step-by-step approach, not really knowing what is going to happen with so much, say, view in advance is a very important part, that one tests, that one tries to be prepared, and that one tries to go step by step in hopefully the right direction.
Yeah, I think we're gonna that's also relevant for us as a business school. We're going to come to that a little bit later, you know, and talk about, you know, some schools who maybe have already chopped off everything for next year, saying nothing's going to happen, and we're maybe taking a different approach. I'm interested really to move on to the topic of the economy, and we probably have about 15 minutes left of our chat before we open for questions and answers. You know, I'd like to launch an audience poll, and this is around how people see the recovery, and this is for the European Union. You know, your economists have described different scenarios of recovery. One is a U-shaped recovery where the downturn will last a long time, and then there'll be a relatively quick rebound. The V-shaped is there'll be a very fast rebound. The L-shaped is that we're in for a very, very long economic downturn. And then there are others. There's a W-shape where we'll have ups and downs for a long time. I'm just curious, before you start talking about from your perspective, maybe we could launch the poll and see. So just a reminder, the V-shape is a very quick recovery. U-shape is a much longer, take a longer time. L-shaped is, you know, very little recovery in prospect, and W is up and down.
I'd give it a little more time. We're at about 60% right now.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complex a question than the other ones, because people really have to think about it if they haven't come across these concepts before. It took me a while to figure it out. I remember reading, we did this poll, we had a global network, a discussion among all the schools in which ESMT is a network member of, 31 business schools worldwide. And I remember at the beginning of this crisis, I was definitely a V man. And now that was my natural optimism, and now I'm probably more of a U man myself. But that gives it, so there's a bit of a spread, mostly U's and some W's. And let's hear from maybe the expert. And will Germany be different to other countries, Jörg, do you think?
Yeah, I think as you can see, the poll survey and the result out of this coming, I think reflects very well what also economic experts at this point of time would expect. And this has to do with the fact that we obviously have seen a very dramatic decrease in economic production in March, particularly in April. Now we're coming a little bit back in May. But it would be no surprise to see really significant double-digit declines in the second quarter of 2020. Now, the big challenge is, and this is something I'm also talking to the Ministry of Finance, now when we think about what actually could be used as stimulus to bring the economy back to full swing, it is not that easy. So simply to say we give money to consumers, to each of us, may not help really, simply because we are still restricted from going to, say, vacation elsewhere, to go to restaurants. So maybe we are even afraid of a little bit of, say, unemployment risk. So thus we wouldn't like to buy a new car or anything else. So therefore the idea that it could be something like a U is also my personal guess. The W could still come in if, say, there might be a second pandemic coming in. So some people are calling there might be a second wave in there. And in that sense, you see again this high level of uncertainty surrounding many of the things that will come up. Now, what is it that could be done? And that, in my view, deals or has to do a lot with the question of what we think is going beyond the crisis. And certain trends, certain major trends like digitalization, for example, probably will rather be accelerated. We see this in our format today, that we don't meet, say, in our nice Audimax, but rather meet here. We see this, and hopefully we can talk about this later, when it comes to the overall situation of the education system, but we see it in many other parts, that, say, online shopping, online availabilities of certain things have grown a lot. And many people have got used to it. Many people might even be afraid of getting infected if they go back to their earlier routines. So therefore, it's now about being prepared And thus, my advice to politicians would rather be not to focus too much on specific consumption stimulus, but rather to allow companies to invest or maybe have a better depreciation in their investments, simply because they know best what their competition is, they have knowledge about their market and can make better use of that information. Maybe if I can add a couple of slides on that, then I can give a little bit of, yeah, you can more parts. So you see, I would say, I call it least bad shape. So this means there are indications that Germany, relatively speaking, might get better out of the crisis, despite the significance of it than other countries. We've had a very low level of unemployment before the crisis. We have a very generous social welfare system that allows for social stabilizers to come in. We have low government debt, low interest rates, so the government can afford to put in a lot of additional funds to help stabilize the economy. And we also have economic sectors which might not be as hard affected by the crisis as they might be affected in other countries. And thus, I think it's exactly the right way for Germany to say, we are in a rather fortunate situation getting into the crisis, that we show solidarity not only towards our fellow citizens, but also on a broader scale to Europe. And you have seen the proposal by President Macron and Chancellor Merkel, and we will see now how this will create and get more, hopefully more support by European partners.
Yeah, just on that, can you explain Germany's change of heart on the idea of giving or being part of a stimulus package that is more grant than loan, and how are they going to win over the frugal four, as they're known, Austria, the Netherlands, Sweden and Denmark?
Yeah, so you could say the frugal four, in normal times, you would see in economic policies much closer to Germany than France. Now, at the same time, I think it's a very important insight, and this makes this crisis different from the crisis in 2008, 2009, or even the sovereign debt crisis following the years after, that I think everybody can agree that it's nobody's fault that things happened the way they did happen. So you could say in the financial crisis, the banks did wrong things, the government spent too much money, but this time it's really an external shock. And I think this also has to be reflected by economists in providing their solutions. When I look at the reaction by the Frugal Four, in my view, it's not a full opposition to the German-French plan, but rather, and this is my hope, that they can change a little bit the conditions under which this money is given. So basically to make sure that whatever money is spent in the right way. It's spent for purposes, for example, of the digital acceleration, of sustainability, so to take into account environmental aspects there, and also to give very strong conditions under which this money is spent, rather than just giving it to basically the loudest and most vocal people asking for the money. So in that sense, maybe the hope is that the Frugal Four will help to allocate the money in the wisest way.
So let's just go back to this Kurzarbeit, and you know, there's been a sort of a history in Germany of you know, the willingness to sort of support employment over maybe dividends, etc. And you have a view on that as well, if I can.
Yeah, if you could go to the next slide, and this is something that came out from a presentation that Franklin Allen, one of the former members of our ESMT academic board, gave with respect to the financial crisis 2008. And basically what he said is, when you look at Japan in particular, but also in Germany, that job security is more important than dividend security. Or you could say that if you think of the traditional two production factors, capital and labor, that Germans and many other continental Europeans think very highly of this labor component rather than the capital component. While you can see that in the United States, in the United Kingdom, this keeping the dividends constant is a much more important concern to citizens than it is here in Germany. Now, this was in 2008, 2009, and it's very interesting to see that just yesterday I read an article by these two famous economists, Carmen Reinhardt and Ken Rogoff, and Ken Rogoff basically said it's exactly the same that is happening now. So again, Germans are very much concerned about keeping the labor market in full swing, while the United States takes a more, a stronger focus on dividends and the capital part. And he says there might be merits to both ways of approaching things, but you can see here that this rather stakeholder-oriented German economy, where the interests of labor are taken more seriously, is a driving force not only, say, in the overall development, but also in particular at the development at this point of time.
Yeah, I think historically as well, from the financial crisis, the German recovery was a little bit quicker, right?
And at the same time, you could say the German economy was prepared when in 2010 exports started picking up again. Yeah. So they didn't have to retrain new people, but rather they could use those who had a lot of experience in what they did and could start this right away. And in that sense, you see also now that the unemployment rate in the United States has risen tremendously. I mean, in negative terms, and while in Germany it has been rather constant for now. And you see here on page 9 that also the unemployment risk is rather low in Germany at this point of time when you compare it to other European countries, but also if you compare it on a more global scale. So this is really a reflection of this stakeholder economy that takes stakeholders' interests as a whole and views them maybe more importantly than just looking at, for example, shareholders or other groups of stakeholders.
All right, well, that's a whirlwind tour through the economy. We're just going to have a brief chat about ESMT and then hand over for questions. So this is more a personal question, so I don't need to share any slides. We're done with the slides. But, so you're president of a school that's been hit by an external shock like this. What have you been doing to prepare the school for the future? As president, what's been taking your time during these weeks?
So this obviously is a crisis that affects business schools, and you can basically read articles on a daily basis in which the question comes up: how does it affect business schools worldwide? So you see this in very many different ways. So you see the international mobility of students goes down. They are sometimes not even allowed to go to other countries. They are not given visa permissions. You see that companies don't want to send their executives to executive education programs. You see that the foundations, the endowments, the universities have get under pressure simply because capital markets don't react to this. So lots of these challenges coming at the same point of time. And you see this, again, accelerating level of digitalization that already started before. So in that sense, you could think of our answer exactly along those lines. One on which obviously I will ask you some more questions is about the digitalization of offerings, blended learning, part-time offerings, also the opportunity which our colleagues did a great job in shifting education from physical teaching to online teaching overnight. And this was really a very impressive achievement by our colleagues in doing so very quickly. Second, it's a question about how to be prepared going forward. We have started at ESMT a very comprehensive approach, looking at what shall our strategy be, being strategically prepared for various outcomes that the future may hold. But maybe most importantly, and this relates back to the slide I just showed before, I truly believe, and I'm truly convinced by this stakeholder approach the German economy has taken over many years. It's maybe you could say the continental European way of an economic system. And to take this also into account for us. So this means to keep everybody on board, to use all the abilities we have among our colleagues to help us not only deal with the crisis, but to get out of the crisis in a stronger way than before. So that would maybe be the three main points from my side.
Yeah, I guess last points from me. I think so that from a program perspective here at the school, first of all, we were relatively lucky because we made a fairly significant investment in blended and online learning capability a couple of years ago. But that, we still had to undergo this. It's a sort of multi-step process. We had to go to emergency remote teaching very quickly, and now we're able to plan better for more flexible ways of teaching in the future. We think that the scenario for us is going to be bimodal teaching for a lot of our programs, where we've got people in the classroom and people joining remotely. So I think if you compare us to, say, again, I mentioned Cambridge earlier, they've said, okay, we're not holding classes for the next academic year. We're actually hoping to hold classes next month. So we're really sort of following the government advice and just trying to be prepared to react to whatever scenario develops, and however we're able to react to that. I think the future, particularly in our executive education area, is going to be blended. I think companies are going to examine a lot more who has to travel, where they have to travel, where's the real value. And I think we've done a lot of pedagogical research on what works best online, what works best face-to-face. And we have built up a fairly good team here to be able to tackle these issues really from a deep pedagogical perspective. I mean, I guess immediately the big concern we have is we have some students who are in the middle of full-time programs here, and they desperately want to come back to campus. They want to be able to resume their normal study. They've been brilliant over the past couple of months. So from I think it was the 17th of March or 16th of March, they had to switch to remote teaching, which was sort of half of their overall first module of their MBA. And we're really hoping we can get them back on campus soon. Although we have to bear in mind, for example, that some students just simply won't feel comfortable coming back to campus. So we have to be agile. And I think we're going to be able to, as soon as we're allowed open, we're going to be able to open with the strict hygiene measures that are in place, but also cater for those who maybe are trapped in a different country because some of our students went abroad. I think the best thing out of all of this is that we're not aware of anybody in our own community that's actually suffered majorly from Corona. And I think this forced strategic planning that we're having to do, which we may or may not have done, let's be honest. I think the crisis has really forced us to take a look at the market in a new way and see how we can position ourselves best. And as a school of our size, I think we've got certain advantages there because we can react and be more nimble on the program side. For example, with the launch of a blended MBA program coming up in September, etc. So we envisage all our programs to start on time this September, although we understand that some participants may not be able to get here, in which case we'll facilitate their joining remotely. We're going to announce a very interesting initiative for our Masters in Management candidates who cannot join, together with a couple of other schools. That's in the works, and it'll take us another couple of weeks, and we'll be bringing that to the market. So yeah, it's not ideal, but I think we're relatively well positioned compared to some of our competitors. And I think with that, unless you have any more questions there, we maybe open the floor for questions, will we?
I think we should. We have some really, really great questions, and I've tried to bundle them a bit in my head. And the first one I think would be around job market. I mean, I think this is related to business schools. This is then, how do you see, what's going to happen to the job market? What are going to be the consequences for maybe the next 3 years? And related to that, do you think that Kurzarbeit is sustainable?
Yeah, let me start with the second one. The Kurzarbeit is obviously a system which worked very well in the 2008-2009 crisis. So many people could be kept within the companies, but it also was crucially dependent on then the economy picking up again and seeing need again for those people. And it worked very well. Germany got out of the crisis very well and could remake this downfall in 2009 very quickly. So this time it's actually of a much bigger dimension. So we see more Kurzarbeit than before. At the same time, we now also see first little signs of hope that there might be a recovery of economic activity going on. So therefore, my optimism, my confidence would say let's try to hope for a similar outcome as in 2010. And this will become more and more realistic the sooner we will see the economic recovery to pick up again. Now, there are lots of uncertainty factors at this point of time. Export markets for an open economy as the German one are there. Nonetheless, as you could also see from my last slide, the unemployment risk is still very low in comparison to many other countries. Therefore, let's hope that many of these positive aspects going into the crisis still remain valid afterwards, and they will provide, again, for many of the ingredients for a relatively high attractiveness of the German labor market.
So if we go beyond that a little bit, there have been quite a few questions looking at what is sustainability, what role is it going to play in the future? What's going to be, is there going to be a new paradigm for supply chains and logistics? And I think this fits in quite well to also what our strategic planning as a business school, as our looking at what we also are very good at already. How do you see the future in this? And maybe you as well, Nick, with degree programs.
Yeah, these are excellent questions, and they are extremely important to us. So what I would certainly see is that there is a diversification in supply chains, so that the dependency on one origin, one country will not be as high as it is today, that there will be different origins for supply chains, that there is a certain robustness in there, that also certain products, think of masks, but you can think also of, say, more advanced service technology as servers, for example, they would become maybe relocated to Europe, so that also, say, the strengths of the European economy, the providing of, you could say, public infrastructure will become another very important part, also one in which there will be a lot of investment. The sustainability part will certainly play a very important role. I don't think it will go under, as many people fear that now only the recovery is in place. I would rather think that this moment also allows for rethinking economic models and thus also even pushing more on the sustainability side. And that is certainly something that we, living in a stakeholder economy, will subscribe to at the forefront.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a few things to that. So, I mean, I think for the future in terms of sustainability, I think people are really sort of being more and more critical of what they're seeing. And, you know, from the customer side, people are pushing for sustainability and sustainability to be at the center of everything. Not only at business schools. I mean, you saw here in Germany, there was talk from the car industry to give everybody some money to go and buy a new car without, you know, having any environmental connection to the type of car people were buying, and then that got shifted off the table for various reasons. But maybe one of them, from my perspective, was a very good one in why are we encouraging people to buy petrol cars or diesel cars at the moment. But I think just going back to ESMT, so we're our sort of academic pillars are really ones that are kind of very important at the moment. They're leadership, innovation, and analytics. And I can see in our programs, you know, everything that we do has a particular relevance at the moment. You know, leadership is important. Innovation in terms of how do you innovate your way out of the crisis, and analytics, how do you understand what's going on? So I think that they are going to be more deeply embedded in our programs in the future. I can see our profile being sharper in those directions. From a delivery perspective, we're going to have more flexible options, more stackable degrees, probably more blended programs. Yeah, I think for us, there's a huge opportunity. Also, I think on the specific sustainability question, we do have to become more sustainable as a campus. We're in the old headquarters of the East German State Council. It's very, very difficult. It's a protected building, but we need to really stretch our minds to see what we can do ourselves to reduce our environmental footprint.
Good. So I have 2 or 3 questions coming in for candidates that are planning to start our programs in the fall or in January. So I'm going to read a couple out. Nick, I think these are directed more at you, but full-time MBA candidate for January 2021. Is there any communication channel between ESMT and the government's Foreign Affairs Department from where we may get any heads up about when the German consulates would potentially begin processing student visas? So that's number one. Let me just read a couple, because I think you can put them. For Master's Program 2020, how is ESMT planning to start the program? You mentioned a little bit. Will there be online remote learning? How many months would it be online and remote learning? So.
Okay, the first one actually relates to conversations that Jörg and I were having this morning, specifically about the consular services reopening. We are aware that there's, for people coming outside the European Union, unless you're from the US, Canada, Brazil, Korea, and a few other countries where you don't actually need you don't need a student visa, or you get one when you on arrival or so. So we are in constant touch with the Foreign Ministry. We have made a proposal to the Foreign Ministry, which is going to be considered, and that's we can't really probably talk too much about it now, but we're in the consular services are supposed to start again on the 15th of June, but we expect there will be quite a strong backlog, and it normally takes a little while to get a visa as well. So we do imagine that many of our students will be affected who want to start in September. We envisage that the students who want to start in January should be okay if the consular services proceed as they have. But we have made two suggestions. Well, one is around creating a separate online student visa application process. The second one is about allowing students to travel in on a tourist visa and convert in the first few months of being in the country. So these are things we're proactively proposing as a school. We are, I think, taking a leadership role on behalf of some of the institutions here who will suffer from the same problems. But yeah, basic story, we expect the consular services to resume on the 15th of June and hope that people can get here on time. Those who can't, for our MIM program in September, we will have a program which will deliver the entire content of the first term, that's September to December, of our MIM program. That will be done, that can be done online, and then the students who complete that will be exempt from completing the first term and would simply join our program in January. As it's a 2-year program, you know, many students will think, okay, that's actually a decent option, I don't want to wait another year. We're also a school which believes that anybody who needs to defer through this, through any reasons related to the pandemic, we're happy to give a deferral. So we are pretty much no questions asked on the deferral policy at the moment. Unlike some other schools who've said, no, we're going to be tough because we're worried about the revenue. We understand that, you know, some people are just not going to be able to get here. They're not going to be interested in starting online. But I think the innovative program that we're going to launch with 2 other European schools, we can't announce it just yet, but it's in the process. I think that will actually, or could actually be viewed by potential students as more valuable because it's an upfront exchange with 2 other top schools that maybe some people might say, oh, well, I can get there, but I'd actually prefer to do the online version, but we'll see about that. But there are options for people looking to start in September that they would be able to start in January. And we believe that the situation with the consular services will be sufficient for people to start in January.
Thank you, Nick. So you have spoken a lot about Germany, about Europe. What about Berlin? So I've had 2 questions come in. One asking, is Berlin as an entrepreneurial hub, has it been more agile? Has it been more flexible and better at meeting the challenges of the crisis? And the second one, is the crisis going to affect its startup abilities, Berlin as a startup hub?
Yeah, again, excellent questions. Berlin, not only in Germany, but I would say more also on the European level, has certainly become a hub for entrepreneurship. It's a very active place. Lots of our students, of our alumni, or also here, work in the entrepreneurial, in the startup scene here in Berlin. They contribute in a major way. And that is also something we want to take forward by even promoting more and supporting more entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurial support, providing entrepreneurial support to our alumni who would like to create their own companies, who would like to go forward. Now, the overall situation will be affected, no doubt, but then comes again something which I think is rather beneficial, which is that the German government going into the crisis at very low debt levels, relatively speaking. So therefore, we now see a 2 billion euro package targeted specifically to venture capitalists and startup companies. So in that sense, many of these companies that would not have collateral, for example, to get a loan, can get additional financing. They are helped by getting through the crisis. And so therefore, these might be other ingredients where the interplay between the state, the government, and the economy could help in the long run to let this sector flourish even more. Given that Berlin is so much dominated and so much focused on entrepreneurial startups, it's absolutely the right decision to move all efforts behind this idea and to bring it forward.
Yeah, maybe just one thing to add. I mean, I think it's Berlin is also an extremely vibrant social city. So it's going to take a little while for the spirit to come back, but I'm convinced that the spirit will come back. You know, there's a huge industry here around nightlife, for example, and that's simply not going to disappear. I'm very, very curious to see what the entertainment entrepreneurs are going to make out of this current situation, because there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people here waiting to go back to a normal social life. It might not be normal, but it will be interesting to see what comes up.
And to add to this, you may all see the picture Nick has behind him. This is basically one of the two, right? So this is one of the two major football clubs here in Berlin. And Nick and myself had the great privilege to be there when they were promoted to first division last year. And you can see even that part is already partially back on track. Now you see at least on television the German the matches of the Bundesliga, and hopefully it will soon also be possible again to go back to the stadiums.
I know we're almost running out of time, but I would like for us to go with 3 questions if everyone still has time, because we have so many open questions. And one, there are a couple of going directly, Jörg, to your expertise as a finance professor. What do you believe, should the EU inject more stimulus? Should there be more quantitative easing? What's going to happen to the Eurozone and the Euro itself in the future? Can you look into the crystal ball for us?
Yeah, the Eurozone certainly is at a very, and Europe as a whole is certainly at a very challenging point. But at the same time, I see the agreement between President Macron and Chancellor Merkel as a very important step. 500 billion plus the additional money that comes from other sources is extremely helpful. It's a very strong start. And also if you compare to the GDP, it can compare with any other region in the world. So now let's just make sure that the money is spent wisely and that it will help to recreate economic recovery in Europe, and also helps to build more on the European project of integrating the European economies even more, because in the end, Germany will benefit most from all these integration steps. And thus it's in the genuine German interest to help other European economies to flourish.
So if we take one or two more questions, one around you personally, Jörg, one that came in very, very early in the conversation. They wanted to know if you as a business school leader have been able to influence the government. Okay, you've talked a bit about how we've been in touch with the foreign ministry, but has there been any other consulting going on that you could speak about?
Yeah, I can say, and this was also publicly reported, even with my name in there. So therefore, I'm very happy to report about it. There is, in my view, a more frequent exchange between economists and the government than ever before. So once a week, some economists in Germany, plus the finance ministry, the state secretaries, the ministers sometimes get together for 90 minutes to simply discuss questions of economic concern, and they range across everything. So be it the question of how to support companies best, what type of capital structure to use, what type of European measures to take, and whether these types of advice get through into political measures, I don't know. Maybe it's also a little bit, it would be assuming too much. But I can say I've never seen as close of an exchange between ministries and economists as in this crisis.
So, Nick, as one of the last questions to you too, how do you see the job market playing out right now for current students, for those who are graduating from the MBA program early next year or for master's programs this year?
I really can't predict what the job market's going to be like in January. I think it's really, it depends on how quickly the recovery is, and I think Jörg already addressed that a little bit. The job market now for students graduating is really tough. You know, I think we've seen, even with students going for internships, many of them have had their internships cancelled. But there's also been several examples of companies who've decided to continue with the internships remotely. There's been remote onboarding of students. I mean, an example of that would be Allianz. I think we've also read about PwC and a few other companies that are doing interesting things with their interns. But there's no doubt it's going to be a relatively tough market. I think a concrete indicator of that is from the student side. We've never had as much interest in students looking at our fellowship programs. So we offer fellowships to students to work on social impact projects for the 6 months after their graduation, and the level of interest this year, at least in the initial stages from our MIM students who are about to graduate, is huge. And part of that is, you know, the job market is going to be tough for a certain period of time. How long that is, I really can't tell, but I would say our full-time degree program business tends to be counter-cyclical. So when the economy is not great, it's really quite a good time to be in education. It's a much tougher market for us as a business school when the economy is booming to attract talent. So yeah, I can't really say any more on it.
Thank you. I'd like to finish it up. I would like to read out one last question, one that I think would, maybe we could even end on an optimistic moment, but what do you think should be the role of business and industry in shared value and responsibility model towards significant disasters and crises? So what can we do? What needs to happen to build resilience over the long term for business, governments, and communities?
My short answer would be take stakeholders into account, various stakeholders into account, accept their views, and that is my personal reflection. Also take rather unrealistic scenarios into your planning horizon. I would have not thought on January 1st that would be here we would be sitting discussing the coronavirus. I didn't even know the name. So we should become even more far viewing and seeing what could happen to us.
I would say we need to train people in business schools to be themselves, to be resilient, to be able to act agile in an agile way, to be critical appraisers and analysts of data, to create different scenarios. I mean, I think it's our job to help create the resilience that will allow society to get over any particular pandemic, or albeit our field is a little bit limited to the business side of things, but I think also we have a responsibility to encourage values of social responsibility in our schools. So I think that's how we believe we can contribute.
I can say thank you both very much. Thank you to the almost 150 participants that we've had today. Wonderful questions. I am sorry I did not get to every single individual one, and I will turn over to Nick and Jörg if you have any last words you'd like to say.
Well, I'll leave the president to have the final word. I would just say that thank you, Jörg, for all your insights and for just, I mean, I think this is a topic which is really interesting to me. Not just for the audience, so I'm really happy about what I learned in the conversation today. Yeah, just thank you very much. Thank you very much, Molly, for keeping us all together, and for doing a fantastic job in terms of communication throughout this crisis. I know it's not been easy. So yeah, Jörg, over to you.
Yeah, well, how could I not thank you, first of all, Molly and Nick, and also thank you all who attended, with all the great questions we've seen. As much as I enjoyed it, I look very much forward to seeing you either again or seeing you on campus soon. And let's have many more of these discussions. And let's try to preserve this glimpse of hope that while things are not in great shape at all in the economies worldwide, that at least there are certain signals that it may recover, and hopefully it will recover soon. It's, and in that sense, it's all on us, ESMT graduates, ESMT as well, to provide our contribution to that.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.